The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital in downtown Chicago hummed softly as Marcus Webb pushed his cleaning cart down the sterile corridor of the executive wing. It was 6:47 a.m. on a frigid February morning, and the city outside was just beginning to wake beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Marcus had been working the early shift for 3 years now, arriving before dawn to clean the offices of doctors and administrators before they started their day. At 32 years old, Marcus moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible. His navy blue custodial uniform was always pressed, his name badge clipped neatly to his chest pocket. What most people didn't notice, what most people never bothered to look closely enough to see, was the small, colorful pin attached just below his ID badge. It bore the distinctive logo of St. Catherine's Hospital, rendered in childish crayon strokes with the words "My Hero" written in uneven letters underneath. Marcus paused outside Director Helen Brennan's office, checking his watch. She usually arrived around 7:15, giving him plenty of time to vacuum, empty the trash, and wipe down surfaces. He unlocked the door with his master key and stepped inside, immediately struck by the warmth of the space. Unlike the cold institutional feel of the hallways, Director Brennan's office felt almost home-like, with photographs of her family on the mahogany desk and watercolor paintings of the Chicago skyline on the walls. As he emptied the wastebasket, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. "Dad, don't forget it's show and tell today. I'm bringing the picture of us at Navy Pier." Marcus smiled, his chest tightening with the familiar mixture of love and worry that defined his life as a single father. Emma was everything to him. His reason for waking up at 4:30 a.m., his motivation for working double shifts when bills piled up, his reminder that life could still hold moments of pure joy despite its challenges. He was wiping down Director Brennan's desk when he heard the door open behind him. Marcus turned, expecting to see one of the other custodial staff, but instead found himself face to face with Director Helen Brennan herself, 45 minutes earlier than usual. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom," Marcus said quickly, stepping back. "I'm almost finished. I can come back." No, it's fine," Helen said, setting her briefcase down. She looked tired, her grey wool coat dusted with snow, her expression carrying the weight of whatever had brought her in so early. "Please, continue. I just need to grab some files for an emergency board meeting." Marcus nodded and returned to his work, trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible while Helen moved to her filing cabinet. The room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the soft sound of Marcus's cloth against the wooden furniture and Helen's fingers rifling through folders. "That's an interesting pin," Helen said suddenly. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively moving to the pin on his chest. In 3 years of working at St. Catherine's, no one had ever commented on it. Most people barely acknowledged his existence, let alone looked closely enough to notice something so small. "My daughter made it for me," Marcus said quietly, a hint of pride breaking through his professional reserve. "She's 7. Helen stepped closer, squinting slightly to see the details. The pin was clearly homemade, laminated construction paper with the hospital's logo painstakingly copied in crayon, complete with Emma's signature underneath the "My Hero" text. "She made this?" Helen asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "The hospital logo, she drew it herself?" "Yes, ma'am. She's very observant. She sees the logo on my uniform every day and she thinks what I do here is important." Something shifted in Helen's expression. She studied Marcus's face as though seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. Her eyes moved from the pin to his name badge and then narrowed with sudden recognition. "Webb," she said slowly. "Marcus Webb. You're Emma Webb's father." The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. His heart began to race. How did Director Brennan know Emma's name? Had something happened at school? Was Emma in trouble? "Yes," he said carefully. How do you know my daughter?" Helen's expression transformed completely. She set down the files she'd been holding and moved to her desk, pulling out a drawer. From it, she extracted a folder, opening it to reveal a series of colorful drawings and a typed letter on elementary school letterhead. "Your daughter," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion, "wrote a letter to me 2 months ago. She entered a hospital-wide contest we ran for children in the community to share what healthcare means to their families." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. He had no idea Emma had entered any contest. She'd never mentioned it. Helen spread several papers across her desk, drawings of the hospital, of doctors and nurses, and of a man in a blue uniform pushing a cleaning cart. In each picture, the man was smiling, and small hearts floated around him. "Emma wrote about you," Helen continued. "She wrote about how you work at St. Catherine's, how you leave before she wakes up for school, and sometimes don't get home until after dinner. She wrote about how you tell her that every job at the hospital is important because everyone here helps people get better. She wrote that you're her hero because you work so hard to take care of her and because you help sick people every day, even if they don't see you doing it." Marcus's throat constricted. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. He remembered Emma asking him questions about his work a few months ago, remembered her sitting at their small kitchen table with crayons and paper, her tongue poking out in concentration as she drew. He'd assumed it was just another school project. "Her letter," Helen said softly, "was one of over 300 submissions, but hers won first place. The judging panel, myself, 3 board members and 2 pediatric specialists, we all agreed it was the most moving piece we received. The way she sees you, the way she understands the dignity and importance of your work at such a young age. Marcus, your daughter has an extraordinary heart." Marcus couldn't speak. He stood frozen, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions he'd spent years learning to suppress. Pride, love, gratitude, and a deep, aching awareness of all the sacrifices Emma had witnessed without him realizing how much she understood. "I've been trying to reach you," Helen continued. "We sent a letter to your address, but I'm guessing it got lost, or—" "We moved 6 weeks ago," Marcus said hoarsely, "to a smaller apartment. The landlord raised the rent on our old place, and I didn't update my address in the system yet because I've been working extra shifts to cover the moving costs and the new security deposit." Helen nodded slowly, processing this information. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken realities about wages and struggle and the invisible workforce that kept institutions like St. Catherine's running. "Marcus," Helen said finally, "the prize for winning the contest is a $5,000 grant for educational purposes, awarded in Emma's name. She also gets to be honored at our annual community healthcare celebration next month, where she'll read her letter to an audience of staff, donors, and community leaders. $5,000. The number echoed in Marcus's mind. That could cover Emma's after-school program for a year. It could build up their emergency fund. It could mean he wouldn't have to choose between fixing their car and buying Emma new shoes when she inevitably outgrew her current pair. "But there's something else," Helen continued, her expression becoming more serious. "Emma's letter raised some questions for me, important questions about how we treat all of our staff, not just our physicians and administrators. Questions about wages, benefits, and whether we're truly living up to our mission as a healthcare institution when members of our own workforce are struggling to make ends meet." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Marcus, would you sit down? I'd like to talk with you, really talk, if you have time before you need to move on to your next area." Marcus glanced at his watch. His supervisor expected him to complete the executive wing by 7:30, and sitting down with the hospital director was decidedly not part of his morning routine. But something in Helen's eyes, a genuine openness, a respect he wasn't accustomed to receiving, made him nod and take the seat. As he sat down, the morning light streaming through the window caught the edges of Emma's homemade pin, making it gleam like something precious and rare. And for the first time in 3 years of invisible early mornings, Marcus Webb felt truly seen. Helen Brennan sat behind her desk, but instead of maintaining the typical power dynamic of such a position, she leaned forward, elbows on the polished wood, her hands folded beneath her chin. Outside, the Chicago morning was slowly illuminating the snow-covered streets, casting a soft blue light through the office windows. "How long have you been working at St. Catherine's, Marcus?" Helen asked, her tone conversational rather than interrogative. 3 years and 4 months, Marcus replied. He sat stiffly in the chair, unused to being on this side of the furniture, unused to being asked questions about himself by someone in authority who actually seemed interested in the answers. And before that, Marcus hesitated. This wasn't information typically shared with hospital directors, but something about Helen's demeanor encouraged honesty. "I was finishing up a bachelor's degree in civil engineering at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I was in my final semester when my wife, Sarah, got sick." Helen's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt, letting Marcus continue at his own pace. "Ovarian cancer," Marcus said, the word still difficult after 4 years. "Stage 3 by the time they found it. Emma was only 3 years old. Sarah fought for 14 months, but—" He trailed off, the end of that sentence too obvious to need stating. "I'm so sorry," Helen said, and Marcus could hear that she meant it. "Thank you." Marcus took a deep breath. "When Sarah died, I had about 8 months left in my degree program. But I had medical bills, so many medical bills even with insurance. And I had Emma, and I couldn't afford daycare and tuition and everything else. My parents are gone, and Sarah's folks live in Portland. They offered to take Emma to help out, but she's your daughter," Helen said simply. "She's my daughter," Marcus confirmed. "She'd just lost her mother. I couldn't send her away from the only parent she had left, so I took a leave of absence from school and started looking for work. The custodial position here was the first job that offered health insurance and stable hours that would let me see Emma in the evenings. I kept thinking I'd go back and finish my degree, but somehow 3 years passed, and now it feels like that door has closed." Helen was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "Have you ever looked into tuition assistance? St. Catherine's offers educational benefits for full-time employees." Marcus let out a short, rueful laugh. "I'm classified as part-time, ma'am. 32 hours a week, 4 hours short of full-time status. No benefits beyond the basic health insurance." Helen's jaw tightened. 32 hours a week, and you mentioned working double shifts? "I pick up extra shifts whenever I can, mostly overnights or weekends. I work through a staffing agency for those. Hospital housekeeping at other facilities, sometimes commercial cleaning for office buildings. Last year I worked just over 70 hours most weeks. It's how we make it work." "And Emma? Who takes care of her when you're working all these hours?" "She's in an after-school program until 6 p.m. on weekdays. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, watches her some evenings when I have to work late. During my overnight shifts, Mrs. Chen sleeps on our couch, so Emma's not alone. I pay her what I can, but honestly, she does it more out of kindness than for the money. She says Emma reminds her of her granddaughters back in Taiwan." Helen stood up and walked to her window, looking out over the hospital complex that sprawled across 3 city blocks. From here, she could see the main entrance where a steady stream of staff members in various colored scrubs entered the building. Could see the parking garage where doctors' luxury cars sat alongside the more modest vehicles of nurses and support staff. "Marcus," she said, still facing the window, "I've been director of this hospital for 8 years. Before that, I worked my way up through hospital administration across 3 different institutions. I sit in budget meetings, I review staffing reports, I approve departmental expenditures, and somehow, despite all that, I failed to truly see what's happening in my own institution." She turned back to face him. "Do you know what I make annually?" Marcus shook his head, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. $470,000, Helen said bluntly. plus benefits, bonuses, and a car allowance. Our chief of surgery makes nearly 700,000. Our anesthesiologists average 300,000. Do you know what our custodial staff makes? I make $13.50 an hour, Marcus said quietly, which comes to about 22,000 a year at 32 hours a week. With my extra work through the agency, I brought in about 41,000 last year. Helen returned to her desk and pulled up something on her computer, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. According to this, there are 63 custodial staff members at St. Catherine's. 48 of them are classified as part-time, just like you, despite many working well over full-time hours when you account for their second and third jobs. The average tenure is 6 years, meaning these aren't just temporary positions. These are careers. She looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed anger and shame. We save money by keeping them part-time. We avoid paying for their health insurance beyond the bare minimum, avoid retirement contributions, avoid paid time off. We essentially subsidize our hospital's operating costs on the backs of workers who then have to cobble together multiple jobs just to survive. With respect, ma'am, Marcus said carefully, that's how most hospitals operate. That's how most businesses operate. I'm not naive about that. No, Helen agreed, but that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it necessary. She closed her laptop with a decisive snap. Marcus, I need to be honest with you. When I read Emma's letter, my first reaction was to feel moved, to feel proud that we'd received such a heartfelt submission. But then I started really thinking about what she'd written. She mentioned that you work before sunrise. She mentioned that sometimes you don't make it to her school events because you have to work. She mentioned that you tell her every job is important, but she also clearly knows that you're struggling in ways she shouldn't have to be aware of at 7 years old. Marcus felt defensive, but forced himself to listen. That letter didn't just tell me about a daughter who loves her father, Helen continued. It told me about a systemic failure in how we value the people who make this hospital function. You keep this place clean. You maintain an environment where healing can happen. When patients wake up to find their rooms spotless, when surgeons operate in sterile environments, when families wait in lobbies that don't feel depressing and dirty, that's because of you and your colleagues. You're not peripheral to our mission. You're essential to it. I appreciate that, Marcus said, but appreciation doesn't pay bills. No, it doesn't, Helen acknowledged, which is why I want to do something about it. She pulled out a notepad and began writing. I have an emergency board meeting in an hour, which is why I came in early, but I'm adding an agenda item. I'm going to propose a comprehensive review of our compensation structure for all hourly and contract workers. I'm going to propose converting part-time positions to full-time, where appropriate, with corresponding benefits, and I'm going to propose a wage analysis to ensure we're paying living wages, not just market minimum wages. Marcus felt a flicker of hope war with deep skepticism. He'd heard promises before, from politicians, from community organizers, from well-meaning administrators at Emma's school. Promises were easy. Follow-through was rare. I understand if you're doubtful, Helen said, reading his expression. I would be too in your position. Change in an institution this size is slow and complicated. There are budget constraints, board politics, contractual obligations. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I didn't take this job just to manage spreadsheets and attend fundraisers. I took it because I believe in the mission of healthcare, and that mission doesn't stop at treating patients. It extends to how we treat every single person who makes this institution work. She handed him a business card with her direct number written on the back. I'm going to be in touch with you about Emma's award ceremony, but I'd also like your permission to share your story, anonymously if you prefer, with the board. Not as a sob story, but as a real example of the people behind our operational statistics. Marcus looked at the card, then back at Helen. Why does this matter so much to you? You could just give Emma her award, take a nice photo for the hospital newsletter, and move on. Helen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more personal. "My father was a custodian," she said. "He worked at a county hospital in downstate Illinois for 35 years. He raised 4 kids on that salary, put us all through college by working nights and weekends, just like you do. He died of a heart attack at 62, 2 years after retiring, before he could really enjoy the life he'd worked so hard to build." She met Marcus's eyes directly. "I became a hospital administrator because I wanted to make healthcare better. But somewhere along the way, in the meetings and the budgets and the strategic planning, I forgot what my father taught me, that institutions are only as good as how they treat the people nobody notices. Your daughter reminded me of that. She sees you the way I saw my father, and I'll be damned if I let another generation of Emmas watch their parents sacrifice everything while working for an institution that could afford to do better." Marcus felt his throat tighten again. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Now," Helen said, checking her watch, "I imagine you need to get back to your rounds, but I want you to keep that card, and I want you to come to that board meeting next week if you can, not as staff but as a guest. I want the board to hear directly from you, if you're willing." "I work mornings next week," Marcus said. "I'll make sure you're paid for your time," Helen assured him. "And Marcus, thank you for trusting me with your story. And thank Emma for reminding this hospital what our mission really means." As Marcus stood to leave, gathering his cleaning supplies, he glanced back at Helen, who was already on her phone, her expression determined and focused. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The pin on his chest caught the light again as he stepped into the hallway, and Marcus touched it gently, thinking of Emma and her unwavering belief that her father was a hero. He'd spent so long trying to shield her from their struggles, but she'd seen him clearly all along, and in seeing him, she'd changed everything. The week following Marcus's conversation with Director Brennan felt surreal. He went through his usual routines, waking before dawn, preparing Emma's lunch, getting her to school, returning home to catch a few hours of sleep before his evening shift at a commercial office building downtown. But everything felt different, charged with an unfamiliar sense of possibility. On Tuesday afternoon, Marcus received an email from Helen's assistant, confirming his attendance at Friday's special board session and assuring him that his morning supervisor had approved the absence with pay. The email also included details about Emma's award ceremony, scheduled for March 15th. Reading it in the cramped living room of their apartment, while Emma did homework at the kitchen table, Marcus felt a complicated knot of pride and anxiety. "Dad, you're smiling at your phone," Emma observed, looking up from her math worksheet. "Is it a funny video?" "No, sweetie," Marcus said, setting down his phone. "Just some good news about something you did." Emma's eyes widened. "Did Mrs. Rodriguez tell you about my spelling test? I got 100%. Marcus smiled. "That's wonderful, Em. But this is about something else. Something you did a couple months ago. Did you write a letter about me to the hospital where I work?" Emma's expression shifted from pride to uncertainty, her small hands fidgeting with her pencil. "Am I in trouble?" "No, baby, not at all." Marcus moved to sit beside her at the table. "Why would you think you're in trouble?" "Because I didn't tell you about it," Emma said quietly. "Mrs. Rodriguez helped our class write letters for a contest, and she said we could write about healthcare heroes. Everyone else was writing about doctors and nurses, but I wanted to write about you, because you work at a hospital too, and you always say that everyone who works there is important." Marcus felt his chest constrict. "Why didn't you tell me you were entering?" Emma looked down at her hands. "Because I know you work really hard, and you're always tired, and I didn't want you to feel bad if I didn't win. But I really wanted to win because the prize was money, and I know money is important because you're always worried about it, even though you try not to let me see." The matter-of-fact way Emma said this, the casual revelation that his 7-year-old daughter had been carrying the weight of their financial struggles in her small heart, broke something open in Marcus. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against his chest. You don't need to worry about money," he said into her hair. "That's my job, not yours." "But I do worry," Emma said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Mrs. Chen told me her parents worked really hard when she was little, too, and she said the best thing kids can do is be grateful and try to help however they can. So I wrote the letter because I thought maybe if I won, it would help." Marcus pulled back to look at his daughter's face, seeing an old soul in those young eyes. "You did win, sweetheart. You won first place." Emma's expression transformed into pure joy. "Really? I won?" "You really won. $5,000 for your education, and you get to go to a big ceremony where you'll read your letter to lots of important people." $5,000? Emma breathed. "Dad, that's so much money. Can we use it to fix the car? And maybe buy you new work shoes? And maybe—" "It's for your education," Marcus interrupted gently. "For your future. Maybe we can put it toward your after-school program or save it for college someday." But even as he said it, Marcus felt the familiar weight of practical concerns. $5,000 was a blessing, but it wasn't a solution to the fundamental problem of trying to support a family on part-time wages. Still, looking at Emma's bright, hopeful face, he pushed those thoughts aside and let himself share in her happiness. Friday morning arrived cold and grey, with a bitter wind whipping off Lake Michigan. Marcus dressed carefully for the board meeting, wearing the one suit he owned, purchased second-hand for Sarah's funeral and worn only a handful of times since. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked professional, credible, like someone whose opinions might actually matter. Emma appeared in the bathroom doorway, already dressed for school in her favorite purple sweater. "You look fancy, Dad." "I have an important meeting today," Marcus said, adjusting his tie. "Are you nervous?" "A little," he admitted. Emma grabbed his hand and squeezed it 3 times. Their secret code for, "I love you. You'll do great. Just tell them the truth like you always teach me to do." The boardroom at St. Catherine's Hospital was unlike anything Marcus had seen in his 3 years working there. Located on the top floor of the administrative building, it featured floor-to-ceiling windows with sweeping views of the Chicago skyline, a massive oval table made of gleaming cherry wood, and leather chairs that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Helen greeted him at the door, her handshake warm and reassuring. "Thank you for coming, Marcus. You'll be up about halfway through the meeting. Just speak from your heart." Marcus took a seat in a chair along the wall, watching as board members filed in, men and women in expensive suits, carrying tablets and briefcases, chatting about golf handicaps and vacation homes. He felt profoundly out of place, like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. The meeting began with typical board business: financial reports, facility updates, accreditation reviews. Marcus tried to follow along, but found himself lost in the jargon and acronyms. His palms were sweating. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say to these people that would matter? Then Helen stood up and the room fell silent. "Item 7 on today's agenda is a proposal that wasn't in your preliminary materials," she began. "It concerns our compensation structure for hourly and contract employees, specifically our custodial, food service, and support staff." Marcus saw several board members exchange glances. One man in his 60s with silver hair and a Rolex watch glanced at his phone, barely concealing his disinterest. Helen continued, undeterred. 3 weeks ago, we held a community contest where children could submit letters about healthcare heroes in their families. We received over 300 entries. The winner was a 7-year-old girl named Emma Webb, who wrote about her father, Marcus. Marcus has worked in our custodial department for over 3 years. I've asked him to join us today to share his perspective. All eyes turned to Marcus. He stood on shaky legs and moved to the front of the room, suddenly aware of the stark contrast between his thrift store suit and the designer clothing surrounding him. "Thank you for having me," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. I'm not used to speaking in front of groups like this, so please bear with me." He glanced at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "I want to tell you about a typical week in my life," Marcus continued. "I wake up at 4:30 a.m. Monday through Friday to get to St. Catherine's by 5:45. I work until 1:30 p.m., then I go home, sleep for 2 hours, pick up my daughter from school, help her with homework, make dinner, and then I leave at 6:30 p.m. for my second job, cleaning office buildings until midnight. I get home around 12:45 a.m., sleep 4 hours and start again." The room was completely silent now, even the phone checkers paying attention. "On weekends, I work overnight shifts at other hospitals, 10-hour shifts on Saturday and Sunday nights. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, stays with Emma during those shifts. I pay her what I can, usually around $50 a weekend, which is far less than she deserves, but all I can afford. Emma goes to an after-school program that cost me $200 a month, discounted because of our income level, but that's still $200 I have to find every month, along with rent, utilities, food, Emma's clothes, school supplies, and all the unexpected expenses that come up when you're raising a child alone." Marcus paused, gathering his courage for what came next. "Last year, I made about $41,000 working 70-hour weeks. That's more than many people make, I know. But in Chicago, trying to raise a child on that income means making constant choices. It means telling Emma we can't afford the school field trip to the Science Museum because we need those $35 for new shoes. It means skipping the dentist because the co-pay is too high and my tooth doesn't hurt that badly anyway. It means saying no to birthday party invitations because I can't afford a present and I'm too proud to send Emma empty-handed." He saw a woman at the table discreetly wipe her eyes. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," Marcus said firmly. "I'm telling you this because I'm one of 63 people in the custodial department, and most of them have similar stories. We're classified as part-time employees, even though many of us work full-time hours when you count our other jobs. We don't get retirement contributions, we get minimal health insurance, and we have no paid time off. When Emma got the flu last winter and I had to stay home with her for 3 days, I lost almost $300 in wages, money I couldn't afford to lose." Marcus looked directly at the silver-haired man with the Rolex. "I have a question for this board. What would happen if people like me stopped showing up? Who would keep your hospital clean? Who would maintain the environment that allows your highly skilled doctors and nurses to do their jobs? Who would empty the biohazard waste, scrub the operating rooms, keep your lobbies presentable?" The Rolex man had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You would hire someone else," Marcus answered his own question, "because the work has to be done. But here's what I want you to consider. What if instead of seeing us as easily replaceable, instead of structuring our employment to save costs on benefits, you saw us as investments? What if you paid us enough that we didn't need second and third jobs? What if you gave us the stability to actually plan for our futures, to be present for our families, to not live in constant survival mode?" Marcus's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I have 8 months left to finish my degree in civil engineering. I had to drop out when my wife died because I couldn't afford tuition and childcare and survival all at once. If I had full-time employment with benefits, if I made a living wage, I could finish that degree. Maybe then I could move into a different role here, facility management perhaps, or building operations. You'd retain an employee who already knows your institution inside and out, and I'd have a career instead of just a job." He let that sink in before continuing. "Multiply my story by 63 custodial staff members. Multiply it by the food service workers, the patient transporters, the medical assistants making barely above minimum wage. How much talent are you wasting? How much potential are you losing because you're too focused on quarterly budget lines to see the human capital you already have?" The boardroom was absolutely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "My daughter wrote a letter calling me a hero," Marcus said quietly. I work hard. I provide for her the best I can, and I love her with everything I have. But I shouldn't have to be a hero just to survive. Working a job, any job, with dignity and dedication should be enough. My question for you is, does St. Catherine's Hospital believe that? Because if you do, your employment practices should reflect it. He stood there for a moment, looking at each board member in turn, then nodded to Helen and returned to his seat. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before an older woman at the far end of the table spoke up. Director Brennan, what specifically are you proposing? Helen stood, and Marcus could see the fire in her eyes. I'm proposing a 3-phase initiative. Phase 1. Immediate review and reclassification of all part-time positions that consistently work over 30 hours weekly. These employees should receive full-time status with corresponding benefits. Phase 2. Comprehensive wage analysis across all hourly positions to ensure we're meeting living wage standards for the Chicago metro area, not just federal minimum requirements. Phase 3. Implementation of an educational assistance program and internal career development pathways for all staff, not just nurses and physicians. And the cost? The Rolex man asked. Approximately $2.3 million annually, Helen said without hesitation, which represents less than 1% of our operating budget and could be offset by reducing administrative overhead in areas that don't directly impact patient care. I have a detailed proposal that I'll circulate after this meeting. Another board member, a younger man in a crisp suit, leaned forward. What about the precedent this sets? If we do this, other hospitals will face pressure to do the same. Good, Helen said flatly. They should. Healthcare is a mission, not just a business. And frankly, gentlemen and ladies, we should be leading this conversation, not waiting to be dragged into it. The discussion that followed was intense, with various board members raising concerns about budget impact, competitive disadvantage, and implementation challenges. But something fundamental had shifted in the room. Marcus had made them see him, really see him, and through him, see all the invisible workers who kept their institution running. Finally, the board chair, a distinguished woman in her 70s who'd been mostly quiet, spoke up. I move that we authorize Director Brennan to develop a detailed implementation plan for her proposal, to be reviewed at our next quarterly meeting. All in favor? 8 hands went up, 2 abstained, none opposed. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached Marcus to shake his hand, to thank him for his courage in speaking. The silver-haired man with the Rolex was not among them, but Marcus noticed him in deep conversation with Helen, nodding slowly. Outside the boardroom, Helen caught up with Marcus. You were remarkable in there. I just told the truth, Marcus said, like my daughter told me to. The truth is sometimes the most powerful thing we have, Helen replied. This isn't over. There's a lot of work ahead to turn a board resolution into actual change. But Marcus, you started something today. You made them see what I've been trying to make them see for years. Marcus nodded, suddenly exhausted, but also feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb stood in the same boardroom where he'd told his story, but this time the space had been transformed. Chairs were arranged theater-style, facing a podium, and the walls were decorated with colorful artwork from children throughout the Chicago community. Today was the annual Community Healthcare Celebration, and Emma would be reading her award-winning letter. Marcus adjusted his tie, the same tie he'd worn to the board meeting, but this time paired with a new suit, purchased with part of Emma's prize money despite her insistence that he needed it more than she needed the savings account he'd opened. He scanned the crowd of hospital staff, board members, donors, and community leaders, feeling only slightly less out of place than he had 6 weeks ago.